every morning at 5, Graham slid into his boots, shuffled to the greenhouse, and pressed his palms into the soil. Dirt pressed back into the whorls of his skin, familiar, grounding. The stalks rose from black earth, copper stems wrapped in leaves of soldered foil, knobs budding like seed pods. At dawn, when light touched the glass, the first speaker head crackled awake. 6th inning, bases loaded, fizzed one. Another coughed static, then cleared into a violin solo recorded long before Graham was born. The air filled with layered stations, traffic bulletins, prayer shows, love songs halfway drowned in white noise. Graham exhaled. "Morning, Martha," he said, though the voice wasn't hers yet. He filled the watering can, poured gently at each root. The soil hissed faintly as if drinking batteries instead of rain. When the last stalk bloomed, an old shortwave set that sputtered into Polish lullabies, Rufus thumped his tail in approval. Graham scratched the dog's ear, dirt caked under his fingernails. We made it another day. On the potting bench sat a thick notebook. Each morning Graham logged the stations: June 3, sports commentary, violin, weather from 1987, lullabies, preacher, static in C minor. He wrote with care. Cataloging gave shape to the garden's chaos. Some mornings the same broadcast returned, as if a stalk remembered. Other times, voices from nowhere, a child reciting multiplication tables, a traffic update for a bridge that no longer existed. He didn't ask how. He'd stopped asking years ago, when Martha's chair went empty. Rufus pawed at the far bed, claws scraping earth. Graham cursed, "Leave it, boy," but the dog dug up a corroded radio, wires dangling like roots. He brushed soil away, reattached a loose antenna, set it back in the bed. At dawn it bloomed without hesitation, sputtering into a hymn Martha had loved. She'd always sung it off-key, adding a trill where no composer intended. Hearing it now in tinny speaker voice, Graham gripped the potting bench until his knuckles went pale. "Morning, love," he whispered. Rufus leaned against his knee, warm and patient. When Neatran saw inside the greenhouse, she stopped mid-step. "What are they?" "Plants," Graham said flatly. "They're radios," she said, wide-eyed. "Plants," he repeated, handing her gloves. She knelt, touched soil, let the copper leaf tickle her wrist. At dawn, when the garden bloomed, she gasped as if punched. Dozens of stations flared to life. Graham kept watering, pretending it was ordinary. 2 stalks had grown too close, wires tangling. Graham tied them together with electrician's tape. By morning, a new bloom sprouted between. It crackled into a woman's voice. His wife's. But not her whole self, only her favorite wrong words. Supposedly. Liberi. Foliage. Graham's knees went weak. Rufus barked once, confused. Nia stared. Did it just mispronounce library? Graham swallowed hard. Yes. That day the garden played nothing but mispronunciations, Martha's endearing slips, alive again. Graham remembered her laughter when he teased her, how she'd insist words sounded better her way. He sat in the soil until his trousers caked. His fingers sank deep, nails black, as if he could reach her hand in the dirt. The plants withered unless fed copper. Graham hauled spools from Brother Callum's junkyard chapel, heaps of wire beside stained glass windows. Growing signal takes metal, Callum said. Careful it doesn't grow you back. Graham said nothing. He paid in tomatoes and carried the coils home like holy water. That dawn, amid sports scores and hymns, one bloom stuttered. Static cleared. Graham, it said. Just his name. He froze, watering can tilted, soil darkening under the spill. Rufus whimpered. He whispered, I'm here. The bloom sighed back into static. By early July the garden behaved like a choir that refused a conductor. Stations bled into each other, sports scores arrived braided with lullabies, a preacher's amen fell smack onto the tail of a traffic report so the stalled cars all got blessed. Copper leaves touched tip to tip and made small, pained harmonics whenever a draft found them. The room smelled of wet soil and warm dust, And that thin electric tang like you've rubbed a balloon on wool and the world is now a small storm. Graham tried to keep ahead of it with ties and stakes, green twine at the lower joints, cloth strips at the brittle top growth. When he trimmed, the speaker pedals gave a narrow complaint, more feedback than scream, and he apologized aloud as if to roses. Dirt packed under his nails and stayed all day. He'd catch himself at the sink, scrubbing, and hear the morning crackle return, the greenhouse calling him back by way of memory. The ledger filled faster. July 3rd, overlap, traffic/violin, July 4th, patriotic medley interrupted by soup recipe, July 5th, rain chance 30% through static, but blue sky here. He added small diagrams he'd never have admitted to Martha he could draw, little circles for speaker heads, lines for wire vanes, arrows for the way a station leaned at dawn. Rufus didn't trust the far bed anymore. The wires there knotted themselves like anxious hands around the warmth the old dog liked. Graham pried the tangles apart, fingers stung by little snaps of discharge. "Easy," he muttered. "You'll hum yourselves to death." But the worst was the new habit of echo. Twice in 1 week a bloom that usually brought ballgame chatter cleared and, between two callers who didn't know they were sharing a line, said supposedly in Martha's jaunty way. That was wrong, not an old broadcast, not a random bleed. That was the garden reaching into him to fetch a word out. He stood there with the watering can going over his boots and let the soil drink from his error. Nia came early with a backpack full of silver. "Contact mics," she announced, as though the garden had taken a class and passed. Little piezos. They read vibration instead of air. "If your leaves are singing in their bones, we'll hear it." She needed a small wad of poster putty, pressed a coin-sized disc to the copper stem just under a dial. A thin wire ran to a small box, then to her laptop. She touched a key and the screen became weather, streaks of color, purple blues for quiet, yellow-orange for loud. Graham watched, baffled as any man who understands wire nuts and not code. "Spectrogram," she said, gentle. "Time is left to right, pitch is bottom to top. See your dawn?" She pointed. A slanting band climbed as the station woke, like sun on the glass translated to sound. Above it, fainter, an embroidery, lay threadlets. "What's that?" "Subcarrier." "And, something else." She smiled despite herself. "Hidden words." He wanted to joke, "Someone else hid them, I only watered," but kept still. She slipped him headphones the size of small bread plates. When dawn tipped fully across the panes, the garden met it. Crackle, clear, then the newscaster in her crisp no-time voice, and under her, as if a younger sibling had pressed a palm to a mouth and couldn't help giggling, came a soft murmured inventory, tea towel, livery, foliage. Nia's eyes jumped between him and the graph. "You hear it?" "I do," he said, and the words felt too small. The under voice wasn't a recording. It was tone-bent to memory, like water taught to hold shape. The display showed it as absence and presence at once, dark where ordinary signal lived, then, faint, a lattice that made nonsense until he knew what to call it and then it made only sense. She spent the morning labeling. "This stock prefers AM carriers, this one, look, FM shimmer. That one is pulling shortwave like an old sailor." She slipped little plastic tags onto antenna wires the way gardeners tag varieties. AM1 brassleaf, SW3 wirevine. When she packed to go, she left a coil of labeled leads and a little box with a red light. "Press that when you think it's her," she said. "It won't keep it. But we'll see the shape again." Recorders never kept much of Martha, he said, and meant it as apology to tape and machine both. Nia touched his wrist, the way daughters touch fathers when they're both going to pretend they didn't. "Try anyway." He had to graft whether he liked it or no, the stalks had made that decision. Two had crossed overnight and tied themselves, insulation sloughed like snakeskin where the pressure cut. Graham cleaned the wound with a rag, bound them with electrician's tape, the good cloth kind that doesn't rise in heat, and set a little stake to keep them from hugging to death. That noon, while the greenhouse slept, he studied the pair. One favored kitchen talk, call-in recipe shows glazed with ad jingles, the kind Martha shouted answers to from the couch. The other brought late-night hosts whose jokes had lives shorter than gnats. He'd never have married those stations on purpose, but the garden didn't ask. He braced for stew. At dawn the new bloom opened small and copper-bright. It cleared with that throat sound the whole place had learned, a hem of static, and spoke in a radio woman's confidence, whisk until soft peaks, no, that's birds, darling, soft peaks, supposedly, and don't forget your zesticles. Graham put a hand on the bench to keep from laughing in a way that would hurt. He could see Martha in the kitchen, elbow-deep in batter, announcing she'd lost the colander again while he shouted colander and then accepted that language is a country you move to, not a prison you serve. Another graft made a different hybrid, a bloom that recited the traffic in recipe syntax and made the city edible. Merge 2 lanes until glossy, fold on pedestrians, bake 27 minutes at low patience. None of it taped the way Nia hoped. The little red light blinked, the spectrogram made beautiful grass, and the playback was, uncannily, plain static. When he listened back, he heard what he always heard when he tried to keep Martha, the hiss of a week you can't relive. Still, the act of making kept something in the room that would have fled. He tied a slender stalk from the hymn bed to a vine that had learned jokes, and the next day the garden gave him a church lady telling knock-knocks, which would have appalled actual church ladies and delighted his. Rufus approved of the new coil path he'd cleared under the bench. The old dog found the warmest square of dirt and turned twice before surrendering. Graham sat on the step and absently scratched the dog's chin while a bloom rattled off the list of school closings from a winter long past. His hands by reflex found soil, and soil found his nails. Careful, he told the bed, he meant the whole greenhouse. Enough is enough. The copper leaves clicked together in a breeze like 2 coins forgiving each other. It rose where nothing had been planted, a pale copper shoot the color of an old penny's ghost, smooth as pipe, without the usual knurled segments that took wire ties well. No speaker head at the top. No dial seed. Just a bell flare, like the lip of a trumpet that had forgotten its hunger for air. He saw it first in the gray before dawn, a silhouette among silhouettes, and thought mushroom before antenna. Rufus noticed together with him, the dog tucked his head, ears soft, as if the stalk emitted a pressure that said hush. When the light hit the glass and the rest of the garden woke, sports and soup and violins jostling, the new stalk did something opposite. Not a sound, but the room changed its mind. The chatter pulled away from it, like water curving shy of oil, and a ring of quiet formed around its bell. Birds outside sounded farther. His own breath stopped bossing the little hairs of his nose. Nia arrived late, hair damp, laptop under her arm, apology in her mouth that died when she saw the thing. "Oh," she said, delighted and scared. "There you are." "Can your little coins hear nothing?" Graham asked, half grim, half hope. She pressed a contact mic high on the smooth copper. The spectrogram bloomed dark where the others threw color, absence as architecture. "It's not nothing," she whispered, awed. "It's a notch. A subtraction. The garden is making room." "For what?" he said, and the quake in his voice embarrassed him. "Whatever you graft to it," she said, and then, because she had learned to measure him, added quickly, "but not today." Brother Callum's number lit Graham's phone with the exact bad timing of a bell in a movie. "You been feeding that silence," the message read, as if the junkyard had cameras in his soil. "Handle like sacrament, Ellery. Don't make it chant before it once." Graham stood with the watering can forgotten, soil darkening under the spill, and watched the way the room behaved around the stalk. He could feel Martha's catalogue of wrongs lined up on his tongue, eager and kind, Liberi, azalea, azalea, radiator, radiateur. He could graft the bloom that said his name to this stalk that had built a bowl in the noise. He didn't. He sat down on the step next to Rufus instead. The dog sighed, long as a sentence. Coffee went cold on the bench. Nia, wise, turned the recorder off. The morning crackle moved like weather around the quiet and did not enter it. Tomorrow, Graham told no one, dirt pasted into his cuticles, antenna wire bright against green, dawn already on its way today. Tomorrow we see what quiet wants. The greenhouse was no longer content to wait for dawn. By mid-afternoon faint buzzes rose from the beds, like bees rehearsing. Graham found himself pruning twice a day, stripping brittle foil leaves that tangled with Rufus's tail, guiding antennae with twine to keep them from knitting into birdcages. But the worst was overlap. One stalk would half-wake at noon, and its station leaked into the others. Baseball commentary bled into hymns, static broke into laughter tracks. Graham wrote in the ledger, garden restless, voices crowd each other like dinner guests refusing to leave. He tried more copper in the soil. Brother Callum's wire spools unspooled in shiny veins under the dirt. The plants drank greedily, and the chatter calmed, but only for a night. The next dawn the garden erupted into noise before the sun touched glass. 1,000 stations shoved into half a dozen throats. Graham dropped the watering can, clapped his hands over his ears. The Silent Stalk, however, held still. Its trumpet mouth exhaled nothing. The others bent away from it like guilty children avoiding an elder. Rufus pressed against Graham's shin, whining. Graham bent low, whispered through grit teeth, "Hush. Hush, all of you." And for a moment, impossibly, the noise dipped. Nia burst into the greenhouse with a coil of wire and tired eyes. "I heard them down the block," she said. "Your choir's leaking into the street." "They'll settle," Graham muttered, tying a stem that vibrated with leftover hymn. "They won't. You can't just prune static like hedges. You need to tune them." She lifted her laptop, the spectrogram glowing. "If you let me graft with you, no." He said it too hard. The sound made Rufus flinch. Nia softened her voice. "You think I don't know what it means? I lost my grandmother's voice before I learned the word for widow. If I could grow one syllable of hers, I'd kneel in the dirt forever." Graham wiped soil on his thigh. His nails were black, impossible to scrub clean. "This garden already asks more than I have." "Then let me carry some," she whispered. But the silent stalk behind them radiated stillness so thick she couldn't keep speaking. She shut her laptop and left without another word.
That night Graham dreamed Martha sat on the potting bench, apron streaked with dirt. She said words wrong on purpose to make him smile. Azalea. Calvary when she meant cavalry. Persnickety like it was sticky with jam. He laughed until tears burned. But when he tried to answer, his mouth filled with static, a flood of white hiss. He woke gasping. Rufus nudged him, muzzle heavy on his chest. The greenhouse glowed faint in moonlight. From the silent stalk came no sound, but a pressure, like someone holding a breath just behind his ear. At dawn, he opened the notebook to log the morning stations. His pen hesitated. The page was already written. Mispronunciations belong to Graft, silence belongs to Bloom, your name belongs to both. His hand shook. The pen rolled to the floor. He pressed soil-stained fingertips into the words, half hoping they'd smudge like wet ink. But they were dry, as if written hours ago. Rufus barked once at the silent stalk. The bloom trembled, not sound, but motion, as if it had heard its cue and was waiting. Graham whispered, "Not yet." The garden crackled awake, sports, hymns, recipes, laughter. But under it all, the silent stalk widened its bell a fraction, drinking the noise in. The overgrowth stopped behaving like plants and started behaving like traps. One morning Graham found Rufus yelping, paw snared in a tangle of antennae that had braided themselves overnight. The wires hummed at a low frequency, a vibration that made the dog tremble. "Hold still, boy." Graham worked with his cutters, snapping strand after strand. Sparks bit his fingertips. The stalks were coiled with little static shrieks, offended at being cut. When Rufus was free, Graham carried him out, set him on the porch. The greenhouse behind him thrummed like a hive scolded. The ledger note that night, his writing shaking. They punish pruning. They want to grow wild. Rufus is not safe inside. At dawn the silent stalk shivered. Graham leaned close without meaning to, dirt still under his nails. The bell of the stalk released one syllable, faint, like air squeezed through copper. Gray. Not Graham. Not the whole name. Just what Martha used to call him when she wanted him to come in from the shed before dark. His throat closed. "Martha," he whispered. The stalk bent fractionally, as though it heard. Then silence poured back in, dense and absolute. For the rest of the morning, every other bloom stuttered. Baseball commentary garbled. Hymns cut off mid-verse. It was as if the whole garden had held its breath while that one pet name entered the air. The next week, Rufus slipped inside before dawn. Graham found him curled by the warmest bed, where copper roots had knotted thick. At 3:45, the greenhouse flared alive, too early. Static screamed. The wires tightened around Rufus like muscle. The dog yelped. Graham dove in, bare hands ripping at coils. Sparks jumped, biting him raw. He bellowed. Enough! The noise crescendoed until the Silent Stalk expanded its bell. Silence dropped like a curtain. All the other plants froze, their speakers slack. Rufus scrambled free, bolting to the porch. Graham collapsed to his knees, palms bleeding, ears ringing from the absence. The Silent Stalk gave one more breath of air, low and even, like a hush. That night the ledger moved again. Dogs spared by silence. The bloom is chosen. Water the quiet when it comes. Graham stared at the words until they blurred. His whole body ached from cuts and burns. Soil ground into every crease of his hands. He whispered to the Silent Stalk in the dark. "What do you want of me?" The bell did not answer with sound. But the other plants bent fractionally away, leaving a clear path to the quiet. He understood then. It didn't want static or stations or even his wife's mispronunciations. It wanted room. A bloom of silence waiting to open. He had avoided it for weeks. But the ledger kept repeating in his own hand, graft silence with voice. So one dawn, while Rufus dozed outside, Graham fetched the electrician's tape and the pruning shears. His hands shook as he bent the stalk that spoke Martha's mispronunciations toward the silent one. The copper hissed faintly where they touched. A smell of ozone lifted, sharp and clean. Graham bound them gently, cloth taped snug as a bandage. When the sun hit the panes, every other bloom lit into chatter, except the graft. Together, the two stalks bent toward each other, holding a space between them like lungs not yet filled. For the first time in years, the greenhouse was quieter than his own breathing. The chatter dulled. Stations came and muted, like radios wrapped in blankets. Baseball scores mumbled. Hymns trailed off halfway. The grafted stalks swayed, but spoke nothing. Their silence thickened each morning, pressing on Graham's chest until he thought he might cough it out. Rufus refused to step inside. He lay on the porch boards, head on his paws, as if standing guard against something unseen. Nia came by with her laptop and mics. "Where's the choir?" she asked. "They've gone quiet." She pressed a contact mic to the graft. The spectrogram showed only darkness, no bands, no hidden undervoice. "It's not absence," she whispered. "Odd. It's subtraction. It's space where something else could be." Graham said nothing. Soil had packed so deep under his nails he couldn't scrub it out anymore. On the third day of hush, Nia arrived before dawn, shaking. "I dreamed it, Graham." "The graft." "It called me." "It calls plenty," he muttered. "I want to be here when it opens." Her eyes were fever bright. "I've given you wires, coils, mics. I've kept your secret. Let me keep one moment." He tried to say no. The word withered in his throat. He remembered her story about her grandmother's vanished voice. "Stay," he said finally. "But don't speak when it comes. Let it be itself." She nodded, trembling. That dawn, the greenhouse trembled before the sun rose. Leaves quivered, antennae sparked faint blue arcs. The grafted stalks leaned together, copper skin fused under the tape. When the first light broke the glass, the bloom unfurled. Not sound, silence shaped. A pressure in the air, dense as water. And then, in that stillness, a whisper threaded through. "Gray." Martha's pet name, soft, imperfect. Followed by a cascade of her favorite wrong words. Liberi, foliage, azalea. Each one wrapped in silence, not static, as if the greenhouse had hollowed itself to make room. Graham's knees buckled. Soil kicked his palms as he pressed them to the earth. Tears blurred the glass above. Nia covered her mouth, eyes wide. The spectrogram on her laptop showed nothing but a black bar, a recording of pure absence. The blooms sighed shut. The rest of the garden remained hushed. Rufus barked once, mournful, from the porch. Each morning, Graham woke before the light, soil already itching under his nails. He stepped into the greenhouse and waited. The grafted stalk opened slowly now, copper bell widening as though it breathed. The silence swelled first, a stillness thick enough to rest in. Then came the words, not whole speeches, not sentences. Just Martha's beloved slips of the tongue, each spoken once as if she'd just made the mistake, supposedly. Foliage. Liberi. He tended it like a ritual. Water from the can, careful at the roots. One hand brushing dust from the copper leaves. Morning love, he said. The stalk gave nothing back but her wrong words wrapped in quiet, and it was enough. Nia returned with more mics, determined. If it says her name for you, I'll catch it this time. The graft bloomed. The air pressed heavy, then whispered, Gray. Graham nearly wept again. Nia's laptop showed only flatline. When she played the file back, it was blank. No static, no hiss. Just silence. Impossible, she muttered, hitting keys harder. The recorder picked up nothing. But we both heard it. Graham wiped dirt on his trousers. Maybe it only speaks to those who keep it warm. Nia shut the laptop softly. Then keep it warm, Graham. Some things aren't meant for tape. The other stalks faded. Hymns broke off midline. Sports chatter skipped. Recipes dissolved into white hiss. One by one, their petals browned, wires curling like old vines. But the graft thrived. Each day its bloom opened into silence, then into Martha's slips, patient and precise. Rufus lay by the door, head resting on paws, unbothered by the hush. The whole greenhouse had become a sanctuary for one voice. The ledger wrote on its own that week, water the quiet. On the last morning of summer, the graft bloomed wide. No words this time. No static. Just silence, rich, whole, alive. Graham poured water gently at its roots. Soil darkened, the smell of earth and old copper rising. He pressed his hands into the dirt until it filled every crease, every nail. Morning love, he whispered. No reply came, but the silence held, warm as breath beside him. He smiled, tired and certain. For the first time in years, the quiet stayed.